All right, first of all, let me say good morning to everyone, and thank you so much for allowing me this opportunity to be here. First of all, let me start off with just a little story as we prepare to move forward and I talk today. I have an uncle. His name is Kamal Siddiqui. Kamal Siddiqui is a hydroelectrical engineer, and after retiring, he spent time searching for looking for slave ships off the coast of Tanzania, and most recently discovered a slave ship off the Gulf Coast of Alabama, in Africatown, Alabama. And so he has this huge fascination with water. And as a result of his fascination with water, he tells this story that I'd like to share with you for just a few moments today. So my uncle shares this story that there's this African village that's located on a river. African village that's located on a river, but inside of this African village therein, there are individuals who are floating, drowning, children who are drowning in the water. They're drowning in the water, and unfortunately, inside of this African village, no one in the village is able to swim. So what happens is there's this man who visits this African village, and when he gets there, you know what? He's able to swim. And as a result, what he does, he takes off his trousers, he takes off his shirt, takes off his socks, shoes, and he jumps in the river and immediately starts saving children who are drowning in the river. He saves children, 5 children he saves, 10 children, 15 children he saves, and all of a sudden the man jumps out of the river, gets out of the river, and the villagers began to wonder, "Sir, why in the world are you getting out of the river, but there's still children who are coming down the river and they're still drowning?" And so he gets out of the river, puts on his socks, shoes, trousers, gets dressed, and he says, "The reason I'm getting out of the water is because the children are coming downstream, and I've got to get out of the water to go upstream to really figure out the problem." And so I said all of that to say this, to preface my talk today. Let's go upstream and investigate the intersectionality of spirituality and diabetes. Have no disclosures today. A couple of things I hope to accomplish in my talk with you all here today is, first of all, I'd like to compare some spiritual beliefs. Of course, I'm a pastor, and as a result, I have a bit of a bias. However, what I'd like to do is to cover several spiritual beliefs, or 3 spiritual beliefs that I'd like to talk about today, and also discuss their commonalities. But then I'd also like to look at the link between spiritual beliefs and socioeconomic status. And then lastly, what I'd like to offer today and talk about what we'll be doing in our program, identifying strategies to positively impact health disparities faced by those who are predisposed to diabetes. And so just as a bit of an introduction today, it's important for us to understand that the world in which we live in is not a silo. It's not a silo. We live in a world that's interconnected by various ways. And so as we think about diabetes and also the world of spirituality, our world is not a silo again. These things are interconnected. They are related. And so how are they related becomes the question. They're related because spiritual beliefs impact and influence the health behaviors of individuals. Not only that, it helps us to understand that when we consider our religious views and also our spiritual views, it helps us to understand and to think about our health from a holistic standpoint. For example, I always like to talk about this, is that you and I are not just bodies alone. We're not just our physical makeup, right? We have a mind, we have a body, but we also have a spirit. And so as we think about these things, as we think about improving health and health outcomes, it is important for us not to just speak to the body. We have to speak to the minds of individuals. We have to speak and meet the spiritual needs of individuals as we seek to advocate for better health, particularly as it relates to diabetes. Also, it's important for us to note that having a community and a social support system, these things are important. And so as we think about our faith-based communities, whatever your religious beliefs are, our religious beliefs are typically made up of a community, and those communities become a part of our social support group. And so then the relevant question becomes, how is this relevant to disease prevention and management? Well, I think the literature and much of what we've heard even today and in times past helps us to understand that it improves patient engagement. For example, if I'm a part of a community, and not just a part of a community, but a community that understands and believes in the importance of health, right? This influences how I think. And not only does it influence how I think, but it also influences how I act. It influences what I do. And so as we think about engagement in the faith-based community, right, our spirituality is important, but this also has cultural relevance, cultural importance, because as we think about our culture, I remember being in the 6th grade and having to define what culture is. Culture is simply our way of life, and as we think about a culture, right, our religious perspectives, our religious views are part of that cultural system. And so, as we consider this again being relevant to disease management and prevention, it also helps us to have targeted health interventions. For example, if we are looking at a particular group of people, right, we're targeting them and trying to get data, we're trying to get results from a particular community, what better place to look than the faith-based community? There's a community of people who have similar beliefs. They have not just similar beliefs, but shared beliefs. And not only shared beliefs, but they have shared actions. Those beliefs impact actions. And so, as we think about spirituality, the question becomes, what are the characteristics of spirituality? Well, as I made mention before, we are not just simply our bodies. We are more than just what we see with the naked eye. As a matter of fact, one person has stated it this way, that we are not human beings on a spiritual journey, but we are spiritual beings on a human journey. And to me, what this says, this speaks to our makeup. This speaks to the fact that we are more than what is just seen with the eye. And if that is the case, you and I, all of us in this room, the communities that we serve, if we are more than just our physical makeup, then it is important for us to speak to the makeup that is beyond just our physical being. And so, as we consider this, it is important for us to understand that spirituality is at the heart of caring, no pun intended. Spirituality is at the heart of caring for the whole person. Spirituality is at the heart of caring for people holistically, body, mind, and spirit. And so as we consider the times in which we live in, I think it's important to note that if we were to survey and do somewhat of a historical survey, I think that we would come to the conclusion that we live in a world that has become less linear and has become less mechanical in our thought processes and the actions and the things that we do. I remember when I was in seminary school that took a class on church administration. And one of the things that was really hampered in our church administration class was that when we're serving in churches, serving in ministries, it is important for us to note that human beings, the church in this case, the church is not a military, well-oiled machine. But when we're dealing with people, we're dealing with living, breathing organisms. And when we're dealing with living and breathing organisms, we have to take into account all of the various variables that impact and make up human beings. And so this allows us to have the platform to think about and to consider the idea of spiritual versus religious care. And let me explain this a bit. So when we think about religious care to some extent, according to literature and theologians, would say it this way, that religious care is more or less built of rituals. It's more ritualistic. It's more linear, if you will. But when we consider spiritual care says that I'm going to look at the whole of the individual, but not just the whole of the individual, but I'm going to consider the social context of that individual. I'm going to look at where that person is from. I'm going to look at not only the nurture of that person, but I'm going to look at the nature of that person and determine how it is that I can best meet their needs. And so, saying that helps us to understand that when we're caring for individuals and meeting their needs, that it is important for us to take an integrative approach. Psychological, right? Psychological, the mind. We have to speak to the minds of individuals because it's important for us to understand that when we're meeting the needs of individuals and serving communities, right? They have needs, but their brain didn't go out the window. And so we have to understand that we have to speak to them in a way that they can understand, and not only in a way they can understand, but in a way that challenges their thinking psychologically. We meet their needs physically, because this is the conscious world that we live in, of course. But lastly, it is important for us to know that individuals have this sense of God consciousness. And if I can be more inclusive, all right, we have this spiritual consciousness. And so it's important for us to speak to that. And so, theoretically speaking, right, I'm a scientist, and sometimes I can be a little boring in my talk, so I like theoretical things sometimes. So you have to excuse me for just a few moments. So I'll see, can I hype this up for just a bit? So when we read the literature, as it relates to social science, if you will, there are some psychological theories, and it is important for us to understand because psychological theories are very important. And the psychological theories are not necessarily separate from the spiritual theories. So let me go back here for just a moment. We've all heard of Sigmund Freud, and Freud, he has this particular perspective about religion and spirituality. He says that religion is an illusion that's rooted in a childhood dependency. He says that it is this desire for human beings to have a father figure. And he says that this is what God does for humanity. That God is like a father figure for humanity. Also, psychologically speaking, Jung, right? Jung, he emphasized, theoretically speaking, the dimension of the human experience, and he says that spirituality is essential for psychological wholeness. Well, that's important because that is essentially what we're after when we're meeting the needs of humanity, when we're serving our communities, right? We're after moving to a place of wellness and moving to a place of wholeness. Not only are there psychological theories, but there are also some sociological theories. And of course, sociology, as I've made mention here on the slide, is the study of people, and not just the study of people, but the study of groups of people. And so when we think sociologically about meeting the needs of a community, we're talking about meeting the needs of a group of people who have shared experiences, and also a group of people who have shared beliefs. And so when we think about sociology, right, or sociological perspective, and we put this beside a theological perspective, or one that would meet the spiritual needs of people, it helps us to examine the rituals and the worship styles of different religious and spiritual backgrounds. But then when we examine them, we can see structure, we can see social structures, and that will help us to understand how to better serve and meet the needs of those communities. Traditionally speaking, medicine has not always paid attention to those sociological or psychological theories, right? But as we move now towards a more integrative approach to meeting the needs of humanity, there are a couple of nursing theories that have kind of helped us to understand and to move towards a place of more transformative thought and helping us to realize and understand our consciousness as it relates to psychological, also a consciousness as we consider ourselves physiologically, but also, again, the binding factor of understanding ourselves spiritually, which allows us to understand and to have this comprehensive framework that is designed to meet all of those needs. And so I'll just name just a couple of religious beliefs here for just a few moments, right? And then what I like to do by exposing you to these beliefs today, one of the things that I think is important, that although individuals and the communities that we serve may have different religious beliefs, I am of the belief that there is more that unites us than what separates us. And so when we think about Christianity highly emphasizes the role of prayer and emphasizes the role of faith and healing and the church, and understanding that if I'm a part of a church, I'm not just an individual in a church, but I'm a part of a faith community who has similar views as it relates to health and healing, faith and healing, and I also have a community support system. Islamic faith, right? There are certain beliefs about health and dietary habits, what I put in my body, because, again, what I put in my mouth is the gateway to everything else that's in my body. There are beliefs about faith and medicine. And then lastly, Buddhism. Buddhism has a certain mindfulness about prayer and or meditation in this case, and understanding this mind and body connection. Well, although these various are the three religious beliefs that I've highlighted here before you today, separate beliefs, different beliefs about who God is and what God does and how God is active and moving in the world today, different beliefs, but there is more that unites. There is more that unites than what divides. Well, when we consider the Buddhist faith or Buddhism, right? I may not call it prayer, but we're talking about meditation. Same practices, right? Even the Islamic beliefs and having their ideas about predestination and what's happening in life, there's still this idea that there is a God who's in charge, or a God who's on the throne, so to speak, if you will. And so when we consider these beliefs again, we're talking about individuals who are part of communities that have shared beliefs. Although beliefs may be different, there is a way that we can consider their beliefs and meet their needs simultaneously. And so, when we consider as well some of the socioeconomic disparities, and we put this beside spiritual belief systems and socioeconomic status, there's an impact. Spiritual belief systems impact socioeconomic status. Well, Is there a connection? Of course there's a connection. There's a connection because what I believe spiritually impacts my beliefs about health. What I believe spiritually impacts what I do with my money, right? Am I going to waste, am I going to spend my money on things that are detrimental to my health? Or am I going to invest my monies in my health? And these things are impacted because they're guided by our spiritual belief systems. Spiritual belief systems, again, significantly impact and influence our economic behaviors. They impact the economic behaviors of individuals because our spiritual beliefs provide us with the values. It provides us with what motivates us. Our spiritual belief systems guide our decision-making process, and therefore it impacts my culture and the way I live. It impacts my work ethic and my productivity. It impacts my consumption and spending habits. It impacts those things, but most importantly, it impacts my long-term perspective. And what's important to note here today is that perspective, or perception, if you will, perception is reality. Whatever my perception is, whatever my experience, whatever my upbringing, whatever my nurture has been, whatever my spiritual belief has been throughout the duration of my life, impacts the lens by which I interpret life. And that's important. My interpretation of life impacts my socioeconomic decisions. Of course, we know that there are individuals who have not always been able to make decisions because they've been forced, but it's important for us to understand that the spirituality has an impact. I'm going over my time here, but I want to say this last thing, and I'll be done. As it relates to our project, what we're doing is that we're looking at African American churches in South Carolina, and we are looking at African American churches. Of course, we know that African Americans have been disproportionately impacted by the health disparities. But one of the things that I really, really believe, and I stand on this, is that particularly as it relates to the African American community, the African American community has been, and remains the central nervous system to the African American community. And so if we can impact the church, if we can impact the center of the African American community, I believe that we can greatly impact the thinking and outcomes in African American communities. Thank you for your time.